Today, we will be talking about Stellar and X. That's because, once again, the PayPal Mafia appears to be kicking into high gear because chat is now available on X. And it has a lot of ties in there, which I've talked about a lot with the PayPal Mafia and Elon and Stellar. The big point that I want to make is that he had a tweet about the importance of encryption that he referred to as Bitcoin style. However, the actual encryption programming is in Rust, which is the exact same as the Stellar smart contract. It also appears as if iOS has added support for XMoney notifications. And it has also just come out that they have partnered up with Cross River Bank, which has a lot of experience and history with Ripple directly and Circle, who has Stellar as a preferred chain. And we have had a lot of talk about an IPO with Circle here over the last few weeks or so, with a lot of speculation that there's some kind of a competition in between Coinbase and Ripple. And that has repeatedly been said to not be true. However, the important tie here that I talked about yesterday related into Stellar is that Citibank is actually involved. There is also some technological into this, which I do want to cover a little bit, revolving around Stronghold and how that could possibly intertwine with the XMoney platform. So in short, it all comes down to what I have been talking about a lot for probably the last few months, specific to the X platform and all of its ties into Stellar and Ripple, and especially all of the people who are tied into all of those. So you've got Peter Thiel, who's probably at the head of it all. And of course, you have Elon. But in terms of crypto, you've got a lot of history with Stellar, Ripple, in a couple of areas, and Stronghold. So the interesting thing that I picked up on probably a few weeks ago was that Elon had changed his name on X to Orklon Rust, which didn't really seem to have a real purpose. However, with all of the comparisons in between Stellar and Rock, it just stood out as a really interesting point that tangentially ties into all of the actual connections I talk about. Here is what I showed earlier. Here is where he actually says that it is built in Rust. Here is the Storaband part. And that could imply that there will be some kind of a Stellar connection here. And it is becoming more and more obvious, especially with the involvement Stripe and the history that Stripe has with Stellar. One part that I haven't really picked up on is that there is some involvement of Rust in the AI company. So I'm still not 100% on that one, but it wouldn't really surprise me because from what I know, which is not a whole lot, it is a pretty efficient programming language. It just has a steep learning curve. So yes, I have talked about the whole PayPal Mafia X money thing for almost a year and a half now. I think the first actual XPayments related content I did was from January of 2024. So it has been a while. However, I have concentrated on it over the last few months just because it involves a lot of the developments of Stellar as well. And they're both coming to a crossroads where it's not exactly a crossroads, actually. It's probably more of a convergence into a single highway. So there are a lot of more esoteric, kind of quote unquote coincidental connections in between everything. You've got the comparison in between the logos on top of the interconnection of all of the companies that came out of the PayPal Mafia, which pretty much originally came out of X.com about 25 years ago. So Cross River Bank is a really interesting one because I know I have talked about them in the past. I just don't honestly remember when I talked about it. I think it was a while ago. And I didn't tag anything to where I was able to find the exact place where I had actually talked about it. But the interesting thing is that there are direct connections into Ripple and Circle. There's also some stuff that goes into Andreessen Horowitz too, which is pretty much involved in everything. The timeline for Cross River and Ripple goes all the way back into the third or fourth quarter of 2014. There is also connections into Circle as well. And even on top of that, you have connections into Citibank, Societe Generale, who is a French bank, Santander, and all of those have their own extreme connections into Stellar and Ripple. Coinbase has partnered with them as well. And if you've caught the information I put out on the interconnected history of Coinbase, BlackRock, and Circle, and how BlackRock was pretty much involved with Stellar at the start in 2015, the history just becomes even more intertwined. Point back at this Stellar and Ripple PayPal Mafia creation. And the interesting connection with Stronghold is that you have Tammy Camp, who is the CEO. She actually came from Stellar and had a lot of involvement in the, at that time, Facebook airdrop, which led to the redesign of the Stellar consensus protocol. And the chief technology officer was actually the first developer for either Ripple or Stellar, I can't remember. And he has actually had experience with each of those companies and those chains. On top of that, the legal entity of Stronghold Technologies was actually created on paper in 2013, which is before Stellar was actually publicly launched. And on top of that, it is in Tammy Camp's own name. So the interconnections with Stronghold and X are pretty interesting. Here is the technological piece I was actually wanting to highlight. So Stronghold Pay API has come out with a version 2, and it is about onboarding and taking payments. Here is more information on that. I credit these guys for actually diving in. It is explained on the Stronghold site as an update. However, the changes and improvements seem to be more extensive. It implements ISO 222 standards, and XMoney appears to be Stronghold's internal code name for their cross-asset settlement layer that enables real-time conversion between currencies and assets. Technical architecture, you have real-time WebSocket connections, enhanced security, webhook delivery systems, idempotency keys, preventing duplicate transactions. See, obviously, I am not a computer tech type because I don't understand half of this. I am just trying to provide awareness as to what I learn as I do. The integration with Storaban can possibly be connected into the Stronghold token escrow developments too. So as far as the actual payments go, the new API can create a multi-tier kind of a system. So on the quote unquote L1, you've got H wire and cards. L2, you can do some kind of a cross asset conversion, which would probably go from fiat into whatever coin or crypto is on the X platform. And in my last X Money video, I had actually shown how Elizabeth Warren was actually trying to hold back the Genius Act because X Money was trying to create its own stablecoin. So is that what the role of Stronghold USD will actually be? I don't know. On L3, you've got that L1 and L2 action happening on Stellar, and the L4, you could do programmable transactions and features on Storaban too. The API information talked about multi-sig treasury management, which I think Stellar has actually posted something about that relatively recently. Batch payment processing, which sounds like paying people who qualify in the monetization stuff. Custom settlement routing options, real-time FX, and automated compliance reporting. It appears to have been in active development for over 9 months. Got alpha testing with internal teams, private, public testing, and then full production release seems to be in the works right now as everything gets out. The interesting thing is how the API handles stablecoin. It's got native support for USDC on Stellar, which would make sense because it is the most popular USD stablecoin at the moment. And in my own opinion, it would likely be the one that has the easiest path to 100% compliance. It is compatible with all Stellar assets, open ecosystem approach for customization, and fully extensible assets. And as far as the X integration goes, specifically the potential interconnection with Stronghold, it would be a pretty straightforward kind of an implementation, because not only do you have the Stronghold API handling a bunch of the interconnection functionalities, Stellar has also released their own API that hooks into MoneyGram as well. So it could relatively easily compete with things like PayPal or Venmo or Cash App and stuff like that. Stronghold has been tweeting about the pluses of the Stellar network and the consensus protocol for a while, but it hasn't ever exactly stood out as all that important because it's kind of obvious. One of the interesting things is that they really talk about Stellar, but they don't talk about the XRPL, which is interesting because Stronghold is interoperable with Stellar and the ILP, which is heavily associated with Ripple and the XRPL.